Oh, oh, we've had an actual full week. We've had a full week of playoffs. And yet it's still pretty slow. That's totally fine. The first week of playoffs going into the second week, only about 4 regions have actually gotten their hands on 4 regions? We got Latin America, Korea, Brazil, Europe. Yeah, that's right. Recording this on the 25th of March. I want to say hi. This is Vision Denial. My name is Sam. For those of you who are familiar, I do this every time playoffs happen. I go and watch all of the regions, yes, including that one, all of their playoffs as they go into an international tournament. This time, the road to MSI. Now, a couple of things quickly to go over. It was announced not that long ago that the LCL, or the Commonwealth of Independent States, their league, who I usually refer to as the Russian League because it's the most commonly spoken language there, has been canceled and their playoffs can't go, so they won't be participating. So that's 6 best of 5s less to go through, but also hopefully things are okay for them, that all of their players are safe and sound, and that things in the region tend to settle down up until then, and that they're able to play for the Summer League, hopefully. Fingers crossed, right? That said, we only have about 6 best of 5s to go over today. Most weeks going in, especially next week with a very hefty week, the next 2 weeks are very hefty. The weekends are the start of most of the different regions' playoffs, as well as the fact that the North American League still hasn't started yet. So the LCS hasn't started, and almost every other minor league other than the VCS is also starting this weekend. There are a hell of a lot. I think there are 13 or 14 best of 5s across the next 2 days. So do note that this episode will be shorter, but next episode will be significantly longer. And I mean chunky. But if you don't care much for most of the other regions, I'll put in, again, timestamps below which best of 5 I'm speaking about, and I am covering these in order. So, and by that I mean order of release of when a game starts, and if there's a tie between different best of 5 starts, different series starts, then the Big 5 regions take priority, and if the Big 5 have a tie between each other, then I refer to their results at Worlds from highest ranking to least ranking. So, without further ado, let's go over the first week of playoff season for the road to MSI. We're going to start with Estral Esports versus Rainbow 7. Now, after the first game, I thought Estral was a solid team who could make it up the losers bracket. But overall, that Rainbow 7 would make a comeback, win the series 3-1. And honestly, most people, most analysts and viewers watching thought so too. Instead, we got a struggling Rainbow 7 trying to figure out how to play their win conditions properly, while they could have had a chance to change it up and have Sohwan be their carry. In this instance, Estral had the better macro, neutral setup, excellent approach to their draft conditions and limits. I will say, Rainbow 7 should attempt to play towards the top side of the map, take full advantage of the coordination they have there, since much of what I saw from Isurus struggled in that department. Estral, you should aim for more flexibility, and Bivoy needs to be more aware of his limits. Getting caught out that frequently is not a good sign. Now, the MVP, as mentioned on the stream, is for Mia, who found ways to create space, keep control of the pace and vision, and truly understood his limits for when the fights needed to happen. Incredible sets of engages. I'm kind of surprised and baffled by the whole how well Estral did. Now, I don't think they'll win the whole thing, especially if Rainbow Seven gets their act together. But until I see tomorrow's series, this is a strong contender for international play. Rainbow Seven does get a bye as they are the higher seed, and we'll get to see who between Isurus and the loser of tomorrow's series will face off. And that's our next series we get to review, as we get to look at Ace versus Infinity. Now, I have a history with Infinity Esports regarding their things. Granted, they're up and down, but usually they're frustrating. Now, As present a very interesting team play that really needs some work late game, but is very solid early game. The lack of ability to balloon the gold and sloppy attempts at closing out games make it hard for me to see them do well on the international stage, especially against teams from the LPL and SK. Given that they're up against Estral next, I feel like they'll have a harder time here, considering that Estral know how to approach much of As's strength, but much more consistently. On top of it, the fact that they struggled in Game 3 the way they did says a lot, given how much Infinity couldn't capitalize either. On the subject, Infinity's not going to do well against Isurus. Isurus has shown that they want to control the tempo and pressure, and with a reactive team like Infinity, who struggle to even get their leads where they need to be, Isurus will have a field day with it. That said, if we get an improved Game 3 version of Infinity, that could be a different story, as they have shown some strong sense of what to read in terms of their opponent's win conditions and how to draft around that. But given the history of this team in playoffs and international competitions, I don't have much faith with that. And it's not looking like if Estral is the only team so far that's shown promise regarding this region's capabilities, it's not a strong look for the LLA. But there's always still the couple of next series from them. But that's enough from the LLA at this point. Those were the first 3 series of theirs, 2 series that we get to explore in this one. And if you have not watched the first one of the match of Isurus versus Extension, go watch the previous video. From here, we go straight to the LCK into Korea. Oh boy, where we go and review Damwon Gaming Kia versus Fredit BRION. So, holy smokes, this was a decisive series. Now, quickly, on Fredit BRION's part, your first 2 games showed signs of brilliance, but mostly nerves. That quickly translated to Game 3. Hopefully, when summer comes along, you'll have a chance to show more of your style and possibly grasp one of the 4 slots for Worlds. But as far as it's concerned, it was understandable that they were nervous against a team who has 3 back-to-back titles in the region, and on top of it, was runner-up for the World Champions. It may be a slightly adjusted roster, but this organization is still really scary. So it's understandable that entering your first playoffs as an organization ever against such a caliber of a team will show some nerves. Now, Damwon Kia, on their hand, had immaculate vision, and laning phase especially. But, as per usual when it comes to a team of this pedigree, the same nervousness still showed, however, during Game 3. Until Game 3. The first 2 games from them were not as solidly convincing as their third game. Now, parts of the issues at hand is still their weaknesses out of how to close out their games, either because of the nerves or because they aren't confident to close out easily unless there is a huge lead that they hold. Now, that's yet to be known. And we shall see what it looks like when they're up against either Gen G or T1, depending on who T1 picks to play. What's that? Oh, they decided to pick against the other one of the winner of the next series. Understandable. But we'll get to see how they faced up when they go to C against Gen G. That said, if they beat Gen G, and they'll probably have to face T1 in the finals, I don't think they'll have the same kind of liberty they had against Fredit BRION than they had. Like they will not be able to like compete as easily. T1 seems to be the much stronger team going into these things, and they are much better at closing out games. And with Damwon's approach to this, unless they fix their nerves in their approach to how to close out games, not likely to make it through to the international stage. But this is a good look for the region. Now, who is T1 facing off against in the next one? That's right. It's the Freecs. The Kwangdong Freecs versus DRX. And holy smokes, this is our first 5-game series. What a series at that. It was a lot of fun to watch. And the most exhilarating thing about it were a lot of the flanking approaches, which I haven't seen a lot of flanking approaches since the LPL Summer Semifinals in 2020. That's it. Quick note about DRX. You were definitely the cleaner of the two teams, but your early game fumbles and slow to execute style really hurt your overall approach, making it very saddening to see many leads you would create in the mid game just be thrown to the wayside. For Kwangdong, I expect something very wild and chaotic, and instead, it was kind of with a bit of a dash of timidness to this. There is something very exciting about seeing a team do a whole lot of prep and setup, skip some of the steps, do nothing, and bam! Surprise flank from Keen. And Keen was here to play. Oh my goodness. Watching King and Teddy in action was an absolute delight. But as mentioned, the team as a whole was prone to skipping a lot of these steps and being timid at all points of the game. Frequently, leads were gained from mistakes, but it was clear that they were not aiming to wait for a mistake to punish, which is oftentimes a frequent tactic of weaker teams, where they'll set up everything that they need to, but instead of acting proactively, they'll wait for their opponent to make some sort of mistake. And this was not the case in this situation. Kwangdong definitely were being proactive, but the fact that they were skipping a lot of steps means that they weren't always properly executing, and a lot of the leads that they did get came from mistakes that were being punished. Now, the issue, though, is that when errors were not punished and the setup wasn't properly established, Kwangdong showed an inability to approach their win conditions to the fullest. And given that T1 chose to face off against Kwangdong as their opponent, I don't think they'll have much of a chance to execute on much at all. Now, hopefully, DRX in the summer will come back stronger, and that Kwangdong show much more promise in the next series, as they're likely to lose 3-0, but hopefully they'll also come back in the summer to take in a little spot or be competitive for one of the 4 slots that Korea has. With that, we come to the 2 series that came on today, actually. We've got Liberty versus the NetShoes Miners. So this series was a little interesting to watch. Ending in 3-0, Liberty showed to be the weaker of the team in laning, as well as in vision, especially in the first 2 games. But, somehow after getting some sort of lead, either from a punish or from just slow play from the miners, managed to properly play out their win conditions and pull out a victory. I was not very impressed by the need to punish a mistake in order to garner the lead. And if the miners managed to find a footing early and play out the late game as expected, I would have seen a reverse sweep. Could have been very reasonable. And like I talked about with the Fredit BRION series, you can tell when a team relies on a mistake or is expecting a mistake to actually move forward with what they're expecting as their win condition. Now, something does switch with Liberty. And as we came to, it's so weird to explain because going into the first two games, they would get a lead, and it was like a machine all of a sudden. They were so good at actually being proactive, and closing out their games and properly setting up their win condition. And especially in the third game where all of a sudden, a switch flips, and they're doing exactly what they did with leads, but from the start of the game, I'm not going to take that as a very large sample size because, granted, it was only 3 games, but this was 3 bizarre games where the first 2, the miners are clearly the team to win based off of the execution of the early game, but the second that a lead was happening, Liberty looked like a totally different team. Now, I think that WAS is really the star of the show. The first 2 games being relegated to picks with very proactive and a very proactive agency, proactive agency, made a damper to their whole approach to the game. But it's clear that they understand how to approach their win conditions and how to close out games. I just hope to see the same kind of decisiveness with the other styles of compositions they may have, because I don't want to just see their pick and solid crowd control based team fighting being the only thing they can play on. Because if the other ones they can play on, but only once they have a significant lead to close it out, does not give me the same confidence moving on to the playoffs. Now, the miners, this was the first time this is a first for your organization, right? It wasn't a great showing overall. Clean up, and hopefully you can show a better run of it in the summer. But I was not impressed. Brazil usually is a much better region, and Game 3 was the only thing that I could see here that really made a mark on what I could expect from the region. But granted, these are 2 new teams to the playoff scene. I'm not super impressed so far. Not especially since the series after this was so good. This was an incredible series to watch. Now, before I go through the thoughts that I wrote down here, this is the first time I say this since I've covered these playoff series in video format or even in written format. But I'm impressed by Rogue, and I'm usually not at all. Rogue usually frustrates me to no end. But Rogue is the strongest team that has played in playoffs so far. Granted, the first week, as far as we have right now, there's only been about 7 playoff series that have happened across from the 18th of March till now, the 25th of March. So, there's not a whole lot to go with, especially since we haven't seen T1 play so far. But if this is the caliber of the number 1 seed in Europe, then holy smokes is this MSI going to be huge. Big props to Malrang and his awareness on how to neutralize the win condition of his opponent, all the while still enabling his team when it comes down to their own. And Comp also played incredibly. kudos to you. But my MVP 100% goes to Malrang. Is literally everywhere at any given time. Now, my only critique from it all is to possibly pay more attention to drafting when approaching the game. Game 3, the draft wasn't necessarily what made or break the game for them, but it was clear that Rogue didn't read Misfits' game plan properly after the fact, and it didn't play around the situation as expected. Now, I can't wait to see the competition from this league, from like what the rest of the competition this league has to bring. In the meantime, Misfits still has a chance to make it back from a rematch, as they still go to the losers bracket. In a weird twist of fate, this is the only region so far that I've seen the upper bracket go up first when they have a losers bracket, as opposed to seeing the losers bracket first. I don't know why, but they have a chance to make it as a rematch. Something has to be said about the way that they played Game 3, where they enabled their solo lanes very well, and while still having the ability to keep up and surpass Rogue, especially in the early game. Now, the biggest difference is that their comp was forced to play early game, and Misfits catered around that play. If they focus on the early play to deny chances for any team to scale, as that seems to be the trend, then no team should hope for late game scaling by the way that Misfits played that Game 3. But honestly, draft better for your players. Your drafting itself wasn't a huge issue, but it looks clear that your players were not being enabled by the picks you chose. Now, that was all the playoffs that happened within the period of the 19th till the 25th. Again, go down below. Look at the ones that you want to have. A couple of thoughts that I had. So far, all of the regions played on 12.5. Now, that's not always the case. In the springtime, the patch itself is more flexible. A lot of regions will sometimes switch in the middle of their playoff series to the different patches. And so it would not surprise me if some regions play on 12.7 later down the line, or if some regions play on 12.6, or all of them switch eventually to 12.6. But from the view that I had in 12.5, a couple of things struck out to me. One, the priority on Caitlyn. It seems to be standard so far, but Caitlyn will look to be almost consistently banned out across the board all the time. Zeri also, for some reason, seems to be coming through a lot more often despite the skill expression that being brought up. And I'm a little perplexed by that. Things that I did not expect as a consistent trend was the use of Akali for a lot of like solo laners. And personally, from what I see here, Akali is a very coin flippy scenario, like coin flip champion in a lot of the scenarios that are brought up. And not to say that it doesn't have its use, it's very strong in 1-3-1 compositions, especially if you have control over the early game. But a lot of the teams that played so far were not super excelling in the early game all too well. Or if they did, they didn't usually benefit from it a whole lot because they could not translate it to something else. So, what do I expect from this in a whole lot of senses? Well, I'm expecting a lot more Viego. I'm expecting a lot more Xin Zhao, more Lee Sins. Right, a whole lot of the situation is people play to the Drakes more often, people are playing for scaling more often, and unless you can execute an early game composition, a lot of the strongest stuff shown so far are your team fight engages. So see a lot more contest against Rakan, Leona, and I think the only region that I've seen so far hold enchanters were the Brazilian League and the European League, right? The CBLOL and the LEC, and only for one game. And I think those were one-offs for some reason. But most of the other ones were melee supports, a lot of Nautiluses, so on and so forth. And that mostly just tells me that there's a lot of fight for scaling neutral objectives, not a whole lot for lanes. We'll see if that changes. Again, small sample size. There are a whole lot more series to go. We've gone through we've gone through what looks like to be only about 7 series out of the now 76. There's still 69 best of 5s and 4 best of 3s to go. Lots of things to look out for. And right now the trends are a little hesitant for me to be like, this is for sure what's going to happen, or this is definitely what to look out for in terms of everything, which teams are better at focusing for what and is likely to go on. But that's it for now for me. What are your thoughts on so far the playoff series that have gone off? Is there anything that stuck out to you? Let me know if anything that you're looking forward to, or if you have any particular things you want me to cover, like any players to watch. So far, Malrang has been the most impressive that I've seen. But again, we still got like 69 best of 5s and 4 best of 3s to go through. So lots of good stuff to come. For those who watch, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. For those who are new, like and subscribe, do all the little good stuff. Put in the comments down below your thoughts, all of that juicy jazz. With that, I'm Sam. This was Vision Denial, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.